Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. In this one, we'll be briefly talking about NVIDIA's utter incompetence on display for everybody last week, covering some of the AIDA64 updates alluding to RTX 3050 cards. Key item there being RTX, not GTX 3050. We'll see, though, if that pans out to be the reality. Seagate working on RISC-V designs, and a couple of other stories as well. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Be Quiet PureBase 500DX. The PureBase 500DX is a new push from Be Quiet into mesh-fronted cases that are more thermally focused. The 500DX maintains high build quality and attention to detail for its dust filters, front panel installation, and fan placement, and still has additional focus on noise control. The case comes with three 140mm PureWanes 2 fans stock and has RGB LEDs, but with a physical hardware switch for easy control. Learn more about the Be Quiet PureBase 500DX at the link in the description below. So this first one, I don't want to get too deep into in this news video because we're probably going to do a separate thing on this altogether. It deserves more attention. But if you missed it, NVIDIA basically sent an email to Hardware Unboxed, and the email was written in a way where the core of the story was they were saying, we're pulling our Founders Edition review samples from you. Fine, they can do that. Reviewers aren't entitled to review product, no problem. The problem was NVIDIA's phrasing in that email said things. One that really set me off was insinuating that reviewers don't work hard for the GPU samples they get. So, my response to that, when I think that was actually an NVIDIA assassin coming in from the ceiling to kill me. I escorted a spider off of the set and to a plant where it can continue its life of trying to kill me. So I'm assuming NVIDIA sends them, I don't know. But anyway, the thing that personally set me off was NVIDIA's phrasing that insinuated that reviewers don't work hard for the review samples. It was probably not something they thought would be read that way, but it's pretty obvious how it would be read that way once you actually read the email. And we can put up clips of it from Hardware Unboxed's video. The response that I had to NVIDIA, though, when we spoke with one of NVIDIA's PR members on the phone was, you don't think I work hard for the review samples? Fuck you. And that's pretty much how it went. So we were very upset about it. Now, NVIDIA went on to eventually apologize to Hardware Unboxed and then sent a second apology that I'm pretty sure wasn't in Hardware Unboxed's own follow-up video because it came after the fact. So there was a second apology that seemed maybe genuine, but at this point I'm cynical and I'm skeptical of NVIDIA in general because the real issue, if you hadn't followed the story, is that NVIDIA was saying if there is a change in editorial direction, then we will revisit the idea of sampling you, Hardware Unboxed. Insisting on a change of editorial direction is way over the line. NVIDIA acknowledged this in its second apology, and it sounds like coercion. And we spoke with NVIDIA privately while this was all going on. I sent them an email when it all first started happening and said, what the f are you guys doing? Now you're going to make it look like every time I talk about DLSS or ray tracing, I'm being coerced to do so. So really good job, NVIDIA. So that was the conversation that happened in the past week. If you are out of the loop on all this, I would strongly encourage you to start with Linus's video. Linus on the WAN show really went in on NVIDIA, did an excellent job recapping it and really covering the points of what are the problems here. And the core problems were those of, we're starting a review hit list. Hardware Unboxed is first. Who's next? Probably going to be Steve from Gamers Nexus because we don't test that many RT things. And then also Linus went in on the details of sort of the behind the scenes how review sampling works. What are the expectations from reviewers? What are the expectations of the companies? And yes, it's their device. They can choose to whom they want to send it based on what kind of coverage they want, but it starts to set a precedent when you're banning people because you accuse them of being out of touch for testing cards in the... It didn't even make... None of it made sense. Literally none of it made sense because NVIDIA was accusing Hardware Unboxed of not testing enough ray tracing, basically, and being stuck in the past. But then you dig a little deeper, and actually Hub has had a lot of ray trace testing. So really bizarre. Anyway, I don't want to spend any more time on this. I have not scripted anything clearly, just still kind of a little bit mad that NVIDIA took it that far because it's pretty rare that you see a company in this industry act in such an egregious fashion when it's blacklisting somebody Normally it's done in a much quieter fashion. Like, oops, the card didn't show up. It's stuck in customs. So whatever. We'll talk about this more in a separate piece. Wanted to get the basics out there. Please go watch Linus's WAN show. It was really well done, and Linus deserves a lot of credit for weighing in on this one. He's in an important position in the industry, and he used it for a lot of good here. Hardware Unboxed has also posted their own follow-up, and they've recapped the events in a pretty good way as well, because they talk about more of the behind the scenes, their perspective, how they've covered RT, stuff like that. And then they tweeted out the most recent apology from NVIDIA, which we can put in our video here. But we'll come back to the topic of NVIDIA and how it treats reviewers in probably sometime in the next 2 weeks or so, but we'll see. All right, let's get on to the first real story that I actually want to talk about. Seagate designing custom RISC-V cores. So Seagate recently announced that it has a new in-house RISC-V cores aimed at accelerating storage and performance needs. Seagate broke the news at the RISC-V summit that took place recently, and the cores, which have yet to be named or identified in any meaningful way, will eventually land in a pair of processors. There's one that's performance optimized and another that is area optimized. These new cores will no doubt be destined for storage controllers, and according to Seagate, they'll allow for better security and performance. Seagate also noted the need to better address data in transit and data on the edge. So see edge networking for more of that. It's also looking at bolstering overall real-time processing power. Seagate decided on custom silicon for all of this. According to Seagate, the performance-optimized cores will allow for, quote, up to triple the performance for real-time critical hard drive workloads versus current solutions. Meanwhile, the area-optimized design is optimized both for footprint and power savings, in a quote from Seagate. Seagate says its custom RISC-V silicon will be crucial in driving its future product, but didn't explicitly mention what product the new cores would land in first. Up next, in between threatening reviewers and ruining our ability to talk about ray tracing or DLSS without people wondering if NVIDIA is subverting the content and coercing us, NVIDIA also talked about its drought, its GPU drought for data centers this time, though. So it seems NVIDIA in the data center segment is experiencing some of the same GPU shortage that we're seeing in the consumer space, and specifically the A100 for this one. NVIDIA, in a conference call that was transcribed by Seeking Alpha, had a couple of statements. The VP of Accelerated Computing Business Unit, Ian Buck, fielded a number of questions from Wells Fargo's Aaron Rakers. The call itself was interesting, and it relates to NVIDIA's server and AI business, so it's worth a look if you want to read into Seeking Alpha's coverage. Within the context of supply shortages, though, we arrive at one somewhat vague but telling statement from Buck on the supply and demand of the A100 accelerator. Quote, I mean, it's going to take several months to catch up with some of the demand. I think what's exciting is the interest and growth in both training and inference. We delivered a record number of quarter on T4. That's the exact transcript from Seeking Alpha. Not sure exactly what they were saying there, and then they continue to say, and with every time we introduce a new architecture, it's a game changer, right? So A100 is 20 times better performance than V100. And with that comes a new wave of demand and interest in our products. But continued, so it will take several months to catch up with the demand. But it's always an exciting time to have on the platform refreshes that we experienced when you get the injection of new hardware. Not gonna lie, I'm really lost in, in that quote. It's all over the place. But anyway, the Ampere-based A100 is NVIDIA's latest workhorse for data center. V100, again, was one of the predecessors where we saw Volta. And the NVIDIA expansion in the A100 catalog recently continued with the 80 gigabyte variant, which we covered in a news video not long ago. The GeForce side of the business is built on Samsung's 8 nanometer, and the professional data center side of Ampere is on TSMC's 7 nanometer. There have been talks as well that we've covered in the past where NVIDIA is allegedly looking into going with TSMC for its consumer products as well. That may be for a refresh, but we're not sure when that would be. As ever, though, TSMC is booked right now. It's slammed with AMD for one. It has Apple in there as well. And on AMD for the RX 6800 series and Ryzen 5000 series, and SoCs for PS5 and Xbox Series S and X saved it. TSMC's been busy. So between the A14 Bionic, albeit on 5 nanometer for that one, the consoles and these devices, and NVIDIA's A100, TSMC as a fab is at capacity. And this is one of the biggest problems where, since all these companies, most of them except Intel, are fabless, they are relying on the few key fabs in the world that can even do this type of manufacturing, silicon fabrication, on 7 and 5 nanometer in the case of Apple. And no matter what NVIDIA, AMD, or the others place for order volume, it's not going to matter if it can't be filled by their supplier, TSMC. So anyway, NVIDIA is facing a shortage as well, obviously in both fronts, but the data center storage is from a different fab than the consumer one, which is Samsung. Up next, a report on component shortages from PC World, recapping some of this, plus adding a bit of our own information that we've picked up over the past week. So a report from PC World confirms that it's not only consumers who have a hard time with the hardware shortages right now, but also the OEMs and the SIs. A friend of the site and PC World's Gordon Ma-Un spoke with, quote, half a dozen PC vendors off record to cover the shortages and supply constraints affecting those businesses. According to Gordon's interviews, and you should check it out, we'll link it in our show notes document below, one common theme among these smaller vendors is that the bigger OEMs, like the typical HP and Dell, for example, are getting first claims at inventory, which is leaving the SIs, that'd be companies like CyberPower, Maingear, IO Power, so forth, fighting over the scraps. Now, those three examples we just provided are not named explicitly in Gordon's piece as being suppliers of information for the content. The sources chosen for that content remained off record, but they're our examples to you of what an SI is. So one vendor told PC World, quote, "It feels like we're feeding off scraps." And then regarding GPUs specifically, it seems that the smaller vendors have also been relegated to paying above the typical price or even above MSRP for any stock where they're able to get it. Quote, "We don't even negotiate prices on GPUs anymore," a vendor told PC World. On the upside, Gordon noted that he was told by some vendors they were managing to receive RTX 30 series cards on a semi-regular basis. PC World's interviews also highlight that the RTX 30 series cards are the hardest to get, with RTX 3080 and 3090 being of particular rarity. With CPUs, vendors have noted that AMD's Ryzen 5000 series are equally difficult to get, so much so that vendors have tried to offset the losses by shipping systems with older Ryzen parts, like the 3000 series, which in turn has driven up demand for specific Ryzen 3000 SKUs and led to new shortages. Intel CPUs, for the time being at least, seem more readily available. According to the vendors that Gordon spoke with, some believe this is because Intel has stronger supply chains in place. Adding our own flair here to the story, this isn't necessarily new for Intel. We've actually heard about this in the past, where several years ago now at CES, AMD told us that its next big venture would be getting more in front of OEMs and SIs to get wider integration and wider spread outside of the PC DIY segment, because AMD at that time had already gotten enthusiast and DIY interest with Ryzen 1000 and its refreshed 2000 series CPUs, but it was really struggling to get out into the mainstream market via, again, laptops, OEMs, SIs. So Intel, it appears, is still doing well there, and sounds like it hasn't had as much of an issue with distribution to the OEMs and the SIs. But if you look in the DIY space, for quite a while, up until Ryzen 5000 launched, the Intel 10 series CPUs were difficult to get in desktop DIY for a few months. So there were shortages when those CPUs were the most desirable, certainly. And the thing that Intel does maybe differently than AMD is pull a ton of the inventory out of DIY and put it into other channels. So OEM, SI, so forth, and help to distribute its inventory among its partners rather than into the PC DIY space where you have one person building a computer. Anyway, as for why the shortages are so persistent, it seems to be a couple of reasons that were cited in the PC World article in addition to the obvious ones, but there's already strong demand for these products. All of them are actually generationally very impressive. It, in the past, wasn't common to see a jump one generation after another, one architectural innovation after another that was meaningful, you'd start to hit a slowdown, like with the Intel CPU updates. So AMD is still doing major iterations with Ryzen 5000. That creates excitement. RTX 30 series cards, no thanks to NVIDIA, were also highly in demand. So generational improvements here were massive as well, especially with second generation RT cores. We weren't paid or coerced to say that. The second gen RT cores actually did improve significantly. Good job, NVIDIA, once again, at making it seem like everyone's under threat or watch to talk about the good things that NVIDIA does. But this has led to the devices being in high demand anyway. Then there's a pandemic, which has a unique effect on consumer spending habits, where it's been Black Friday volume for several months now. Furthermore, the pandemic, as well as the US-China dispute, has taken a toll on logistics. And then from what we're told from vendors and what our experiences are getting our own products shipped around the world right now for the GN store, the shipping companies have not really increased the volume or their capacity in step with the volume of products going to port. So just as an example, we recently shipped our toolkits, and they're coming to our warehouse for distribution in probably January, it's looking like. But when we shipped those, the choice was, do you do ocean freight or do you do air freight? And ocean freight is obviously a lot cheaper and a lot slower. Air freight's a lot more expensive. But right now, the air freight options are over 2 times what they normally are. So even for this time of year, it would have been over $10 per unit to air freight them, which is maybe fine if you're shipping something to your friend domestically, but when you're shipping on a pallet, that's an absolutely obscene price to pay. So, and that takes money out of the margin, obviously, for companies. We end up doing ocean freight, so we're all good. But some of these companies, they're forced to make tough decisions of, do you air freight your really heavy GPUs and water blocks, or do you ocean freight them? And if you air freight them, can you get away with increasing the price to make sure you don't lose money or reduce your margin too much on it? Or is that going to be perceived as scalping in the current market? So that's the issues they're facing. Additionally, beyond just the demand, it's logistics and the capacity to get stuff out of China or Taiwan or wherever it's being manufactured. So one of the companies we spoke with outside of the PC world piece, we spoke with some custom parts manufacturers. One of the companies we spoke with this morning said that it has millions of dollars worth of products sitting ready to go to customers, but they can't get it out of the port because they can't justify getting into a bidding war over container space to go on the ship, obviously. And the reason they can't justify getting into a bidding war over it is because the much larger corporations that are not in the PC space, companies that ship just everything globally, everything from toilet paper to cars, those larger companies are more willing to pay for the container space right now and bid for it, whereas companies that make niche custom computer parts, especially those that aren't major manufacturers, might not be able to justify it with their margins. So that's one of the challenges additionally right now. And it sounds like a lot of that stuff's just going to be waiting until after Christmas to ship. So even though the shipping timelines for a boat won't work now anyway, everyone's still rushing to get stuff out of the country and into wherever it's going. So anyway, back to the PC World story. The vendors, speaking with PC World, said that they've seen demand, quote, up 300% to 400% for desktop gaming machines. Moreover, demand isn't expected to subside anytime soon, and shortages are likely to remain in place through early 2021. In addition, as many vendors are dealing with above MSRP prices and rising shipping costs, it's likely that some of the costs will get passed to customers. And for more on the SI side of the story, definitely check out PC World's reporting. Gordon is probably one of the most entertaining people in the industry. He has been doing this a while, and he used to work as the EIC at Maximum PC, so you might be familiar with his work from Maximum PC magazine days. But we're always happy to support his work, so go check it out at PCWorld.com. Okay, SMIC getting blacklisted. Unsurprisingly, China-based chip maker SMIC has been put on the Department of Defense's entity list essentially blacklisting the company from American business. SMIC, much like Huawei, has been a target recently over alleged ties to the Chinese military and feared espionage. The DoD laid out its plans to add SMIC as well as other Chinese companies to its entity list last month. SMIC stands for Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation. It is China's largest chip maker, and it's part state-owned and part publicly listed. SMIC operates globally, and its U.S. customer base, if you're curious, includes Broadcom, Qualcomm, and TI, or Texas Instruments. SMIC also holds support from notable U.S. investment groups such as Vanguard Group and BlackRock Institutional Trust Company. SMIC is essentially the linchpin in China's domestic chip production ambitions as it attempts to wean itself off of American technology. In the current climate, SMIC continues to find itself unable to get access to critical chip IP and manufacturing equipment. SMIC recently announced its N+1 process, and while it didn't offer a transistor geometry, it's expected to be comparable to Samsung's 8nm process. Now, we as a rule here do not make any political commentary on anything right to repair accepted in that one. So no commentary from us on this story, but we include these stories because silicon manufacturing outside of the existing fabs and outside of the existing chip makers is a significant technological story, and so we've been covering SMIC's efforts as they have grown. Up next, AMD will continue reference RX 6000 series production despite initial plans to cancel production in January. So last month, AMD's Scott Herkelman stated that AMD would be winding down production of reference RX 6800 series cards in early 2021. This in itself isn't unusual. Often it's the case once AIB partners get their own designs off the ground and into retail channels. However, some users felt that AMD's reference board production was too short-lived and voiced concerns, especially as many still couldn't get the custom or the reference cards yet. Because of these concerns or complaints voiced by the community, AMD has walked back its decision to kill the reference production early. And one of the main points that was brought up was that of water block compatibility, where people were able to acquire a water block for a 6000 series card but not able to get the card itself, obviously leaving you concerned whether you have a wasted water block on your hands. A good news there, before we get further into this, is that the board partners do also buy reference PCBs from AMD, just with a different cooler. So you could still get one for your water block if you can't get the reference AMD card. The downside is you would be paying extra for a cooler you're not going to use, but you'd at least be able to get the board. That said, though, AMD is planning to bring back the reference RX 6000 series video cards. So thanks to the outcry on social media, as has lately been a trend for AMD, the company buckled to Twitter and Reddit and did a 180 saying, quote, "We've just officially extended the reference design builds indefinitely due to popular demand. Thanks for the feedback," stated on Twitter via Scott Herkelman. AMD's RX 6800 series cards have gone the same way as the NVIDIA RTX 30 series and the AMD Ryzen 5000 series CPUs and the new consoles, in that the stock has evaporated. So AMD keeping its board production for the foreseeable future is probably a good thing, at least until the stock and the demand normalizes a bit. There's still a fixed amount of GPUs you can get, so that only helps so much, but they should be closer at least to MSRP. In theory, they should be MSRP, so at least there's that. Up next, rumor. Intel Sapphire Rapids could use an MCM design, or a multi-chip module approach. In an image of what is purported to be a Sapphire Rapids Xeon SP CPU spotted over at Serve the Home, it appears like we're not looking at traditional Xeon parts. Instead, it looks like it has two integrated heat spreaders fused into one, two identical sets of capacitors on the bottom of the chip, replete with all the necessary LGA pins split into two halves. The IHS is marked with a QTQ2 2.00 gigahertz stepping. Sapphire Rapids and its Eagle Stream server platform are expected to succeed the Whitley platform, which is where Cooper Lake SP and Ice Lake SP belong. Sapphire Rapids is expected to be built on Intel's 10nm SuperFin process, and will see the platform make use of the emergent DDR5, PCIe Gen 5, and CXL 1.1, among other new technologies. It's entirely possible that Intel may be planning a chiplet or MCM approach for 10nm instead of using a monolithic die for some parts. At this point, it's well documented how chiplet-based designs can be deployed to better control costs and improve yields, among other things. And Intel has also been playing around with different approaches like Foveros for 3D packaging. Intel has invested heavily in off-package and off-chip interconnects, such as Co-EMIB, again, Foveros, Omnidirectional Interconnect, or ODI, and MDIO. Up next, the latest version of Ada64, which is a logging utility similar to Hardware Info 64 in some ways. Latest version has added more RTX 30 cards with IDs added to its supported list and release notes. They include the RTX 3050, again, RTX there being key. That's supposed to be GA107. RTX 3060 or GA106, not to be confused with the Ti that's already out. The RTX 3060 Mobile or GA106M. The RTX 3070 Mobile, non-16 gigabyte and then 16 gigabyte are in there. A 3070 Mobile Max Q SKU, and then a 3080 Ti. And for the 3070s, those are all GA104M. And one of them is 16 gigabytes. And then there's a 3080 Ti listed as GA102. Interestingly, the listing shows 3 different configurations again for the 3070, for the mobile version of it. We have not heard much about where Ampere is going officially for notebooks, but it's definitely coming. We just don't know the timing. The listing seems to suggest the RTX 3070 and 3060 powered laptops could be imminent. Additionally, the release notes add more credence to the rumored RTX 3080 Ti and entry-level RTX 3050. NVIDIA just introduced the 3060 Ti and hasn't said much more about the non-Ti variant yet. Quick heads up on a Newegg policy change too. We'll keep this brief, but Newegg, when it was trying to combat scalping, originally started bundling GPUs together with motherboards, CPUs, other parts. This is not totally uncommon. We actually saw this with Vega 56 and 64 as well, although back then it was more of an MDF arrangement. But happened again, and Newegg briefly had a policy where it would allow you to purchase a combo and then return individual parts if you wanted for a refund equal to the value of that part in the combo. That, it looks like, has changed. So we just wanted to point that out so that people don't get burned trying to follow through with returning bits and pieces of it. Have you purchased your combo before the policy changed, it looks like you're still good. You can still get a partial refund. But if not, then it may be an all or nothing. You either return all of it or you keep and use all of it. So the policy change was spotted via Reddit, and as Hot Hardware points out, some other retailers seem to be faring better with different policies. Quote, other retailers have decent enough policies in place where people are not encountering issues. For example, Micro Center has apparently been taking IDs and limiting how many GPUs or CPUs people can buy in a month. Best Buy, although a hassle, requires in-person pickups for GPU orders. While both options do not necessarily work for Newegg, they could be adapted, perhaps, says Hot Hardware. Then last story here for this one, the Intel Celeron D347 crossing 8 gigahertz again. If you recall, Intel's NetBurst CPUs, you may recall the aptness for overclocking potential. It was a different time when CPUs went 8 gigahertz plus sometimes. AMD FX did this as well, of course. So Intel NetBurst-based Celeron spanned a few different iterations, like Prescott 256. There was Cedar Mill. There was a Celeron D347 belonging to Cedar Mill. And overclocker Ivan Chu 0208 recently managed an 8362 megahertz overclock on the Celeron D347 using an X38 chipset-based Asus P5 E64 motherboard. As usual, LN2 was used, and interestingly, this isn't even the highest overclock a NetBurst CPU has hit. So the Celeron D352, for example, holds that record at 8543 megahertz, pointed out by Tom's Hardware and its coverage of the NetBurst CPU. That's it for this recap. As always, you can help us out directly on store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus, and check out some of our Cyberpunk coverage. There's been a lot of it. We've got more coming. We'll see you all next time.